Welcome back. Today we're going to do some blocking, the roof rafters, and we're going to put up the oak post that we cut the other day on the mill. The job site was starting to get a little cluttered with all the offcuts from the framing, and one of the good ways to get rid of that is to start blocking the walls. Any wall over 10 foot requires blocking mid-span. These walls on the front wall are 9 feet. That's the shortest wall in the house. Everything else will be taller than that, and so we will block those out all the way around. The other exciting thing is we got our electric pedestal put in, and this will be the first step in getting electric brought to the house. So the pedestal basically comprises a meter and a GFCI outlet, and we'll bury that here, and you can't quite see, but through the woods there, the road is up there, and our plan is to plant a power pole at the road, somewhat offset from the driveway, and then we will bury the wire coming into the house up to this pedestal. We'll also be burying the water and the cable along with it in that process. Not all exactly the same way, but it'll all be coming at about the same time. The really exciting thing about this is once we get the electric hooked up, then I'll be able to have power on site for anything I need, power tools, etc. And as hot as things have been, a fan would be awfully nice. But onto the roof rafters. So I could have gone about 3 different directions this week in terms of what I wanted to tackle or what I wanted to accomplish, and I kind of went all 3 directions at once. Oftentimes you'll build all of the exterior walls before you start putting up the rafters, but because of the way the house is designed, I can actually tackle each of these sections as almost an independent little house, and you'll see that a little bit more later. So here I am cutting the lowest side of the rafter, and I'm using the common scale on the speed square, and I'm looking for a 3.5 pitch, so you just look for the 3.5 pitch mark. Also, by checking calculations or by checking pitch tables, 3.5 pitch equals out to 16.25 degrees, so you can use either one in creating your plumb cut. And here, because I have 2x6 plates, I am measuring a square line 5.5 inches for the bird's mouth so that it sits fully on top of the plate. I will have a flush cut on the rafter, flush with the plate and the outside of the house, and then we'll have 2x6 rafter tails coming later. The rafter tails will extend out 1 foot on the bottom of the roof, on the lowest side of the roof, and they'll extend out 3 feet on the high side of the roof where the deck will be and where most of our windows and doors will be facing the exterior part of the property. And rafter tails are a good way to address that rather than trying to get 3 feet of overhang cut out of a single roof rafter. But I'll go into more detail on the rafter tails when we get to that point. As I did with the stair stringers, I'm going to use that first rafter that I cut as a template for the remaining rafters so that they're all identical. It's just good to remember that when you mark those boards from the template, once you start cutting, you want to take that entire line so that the boards are in fact identical to the template. Other than that, it just set up an assembly line process to speed things along, and you can knock these out pretty quickly. Unlike the lower part of the roof where I put a plumb cut on the rafter, for the higher part, which is going to sit on the midspan, I'm letting those rafters extend past the bird mouth because the roof will continue at the same pitch to the higher wall that we'll put up next, and that extra wood just marries with the rafters that will sister against them from the midspan to the higher wall, which will give us additional nailing surface when we're sistering and securing one rafter to the next. If you've been watching along, you know that I mention level, plumb, and parallel an awful lot, and the reason is so that when I get to doing things like these rafters, it just makes them easier. Every single rafter is exactly 12 feet 2.5 inches from one wall to the next, so I don't have to spend any time measuring individual rafters. I can just cut them all at once and then put them all in place, and so that time and effort spent in making sure that things are parallel and plumb really pays off when you're working in the air and you're doing things like this. For nailing, I'm putting in 2 nails on either side of the rafter into the top plate, so that's 4, and then an additional nail through the top plate into the bottom of the rafter, so we have 5 nails securing each rafter at either end. The other nice thing about getting these rafters up, perhaps selfishly, is as hot and sunny as it's been, it actually provides a little bit of relief and shade when I'm working on this top section of the house. So I've got about half the rafters up, and now I want to turn to the oak post that we milled up the other day. So now I'm just squaring off the bottom so that I can put it in a post base that will secure the post to the subfloor to prevent uplift. So this is the post base. It's an 8x8 post base. It's actually about a ½ inch larger than my post, which is fantastic because it gives me a little bit of shimmy room once I get the post in place. I used a plumb line to determine exactly where it needed to be on the ground, and of course that'll also tell me where it needs to be in the air. And this post will be a center support for the 3 laminated LVLs that we put in place that span across the room. Ultimately, that post will be sort of at the edge of our kitchen, and it will be flush with the LVL to allow for proper trimming and finishing. So here I'm doing the top of the post. I've already determined the height that I need based on the width of the post bases and the height of the LVLs. The way I like to do these is I make my first cut. Obviously, I want the line to be as square as possible. But then I like to rotate the post away from me and measure again, square the line, and then I use the saw to start the line and then follow to the next cut. Short of having a giant saw that can cut through it all at one time, for me this method has proven the most reliable to get a good square cut. So I do have just a little bit of dressing I want to do. There's a little bit of a ridge from the cut, so just knocking that down with the chisel, and this will give me a pretty flat surface. And as I did with the post bases in the basement, I don't want a completely flat post end, so we're going to address that here in a minute. Now I just want to position the post to get it kind of where I want it to go before I raise it, and just moving it that little bit just reinforces how heavy this post is. As I mentioned, it's a white oak post. The ones in the basement were pine. I mentioned in the milling video that it might be 50% heavier than the pine posts. It might be twice as heavy. So now for the post base, as I said, I don't want it completely flat. I want it a little bit concave, and the reason is I don't want this post to rock at all on the base. So by just taking a little bit of the meat out of the center, it ensures that the bearing of the post is pretty even on all 4 edges, and it sits really nicely. You don't have to dig in much, just enough to ensure that the post won't rock. At this point, despite how heavy this post is and how unmanageable it seems to be at times, I have not yet convinced myself that I can't do this, but that's sort of just in my nature generally. So I try a couple of different ways, and now I'm just contemplating whether or not, in fact, I can do this without additional assistance. So my first thought is, well, I'll just raise it with a strap, and I had a strap on hand. This is not ideal because, as I'm sure you can figure out pretty quickly, ratchet straps only get you about 6 inches to a foot of travel before you get so much strap in the binding that you can't really go any further. So I could inch it up and get it to a point where I could rest it on the sawhorses, but beyond that, I don't feel like I can safely get this thing up by myself. When all else fails, you go buy another tool. So this is the tool, a chain hoist. I didn't have one, and I wanted one anyway for the sawmill, because when I build the sawmill shed, I'll use it to help move logs around. But this is really a perfect solution for this. The carrying beam can more than carry the weight of the post to get it up, and so I have a chain from the tractor that I put up there, and I attach the chain hoist, and then this becomes Egyptian simple. Like, it's just a matter of yanking on this chain, so to speak, and I have an enormous amount of control over how quickly it comes up, and it will also hold it in place while I'm further securing it once it's up in a vertical position. And once the column is up in a vertical position, there's really no weight to it. It's just a matter of keeping it standing. So once we're past that point, we're in good shape. Also, because I've stressed how heavy this post is, I'll also say that this post is resting directly over the 8x8 carrying, or 8x12 carrying beam that we created in the basement, and additionally is also over the pine post that is supporting that carrying beam, which is in turn supported by a footer. So all of the downward pressure is fully supported from a design perspective. I also decided to put a identical post base at the top, so it's really a post cap. And of course, I took those into account when I was measuring the post itself. But to me, this is the best way to secure the post to the carrying beam and the LVLs above. Problem is, I have to secure this post base to the LVLs before I slip in the post, and so this lip on the post base is preventing me from doing that. So I'm going to take off one of these lips, and that will enable me to secure the post base to the LVLs and then slip the oak post into this base assembly. Now that that lip is gone, I can secure the post cap to the LVLs. I'm using 5-inch structural screws. It's what I used on the bottom as well, and it's what I'll also use to pin them from the sides. As I mentioned, the post base is just a little bit larger than the post itself, which again is great because it gives me a little bit of shimmy room to ensure that everything is level and plumb. And right now I just have that oak post strapped to the scaffolding because again there's really no lateral weight to it. I just need to hold it up. Ultimately the outside of this post will be flush with the LVL, and I will also add a T-plate just again for additional security. If you remember, the LVL beam here is a 5¼ inch beam because it's 3 LVLs put together, and the post is an 8x8. So you do the math, and yes, there's a portion of the post that is not carrying anything, but that doesn't really matter because ultimately it's going to be under a drop ceiling, so there's no concern from a detail perspective once we get to that point. So now the post is secured and in place and is plumb, and now we can finish the rafters. So I did about the first half of them before I put up the post. I wanted to get the post up before I put up the rest of them just so that we didn't put unnecessary weight on that carrying beam without that post being in place. Although, as I said, there really wouldn't be any problem. Quite frankly, we could probably leave that carrying beam unsupported and it would support the roof just fine. But again, I'm overbuilding the house quite a bit in different places, and that's an example of it. Plus, it's a nice detail once we have the kitchen complete to have that nice oak post right in the center of the room. With the exception of some detail work that I'll do when I actually do the roof, the vast majority of the framing for this section of the house is complete. And the nice thing is that this section, as you can see here, represents everything that I need to do for the rest of the house. So I've really just built a miniature version of the rest of the house here. So I'll kind of do this 3 more times and all of the rough framing will be complete. There will be, of course, some differences in wall heights and things like that, but everything I really needed to do for the entire house, I've pretty much done for this small miniaturized section. And then the last thing I will do is, because I have moved around the bracing for the walls in order to maneuver the scaffolding and things like that, I will replace all of that bracing and also put bracing on the roof rafters as well. But this is where I'm at. Thanks for watching. See you next time.